She never looked at him the way most people did. That was the first thing he noticed. Everyone else seemed to see his looks first, the shape of his shoulders, the expensive watch that caught the afternoon light, or sometimes the quiet confidence he carried when he entered a room. But she didn't stop to measure him like a prize on display. Her eyes lingered differently, studying him in a way that felt like she was asking a question he wasn't used to answering. That's what made their first meeting unforgettable. Not her smile, not her laugh, not even her words, but the fact that he felt, for the first time in years, like someone was actually trying to see him instead of sizing him up. He had grown accustomed to the kind of attention that turned people into shadows of themselves, hiding beneath expectations or the powerful glow of someone else's fortune. He often pretended not to notice when gold-dipped compliments spilled from strangers' lips or when flirtations came with calculations instead of genuine sincerity. But with her, it was different from the very first moment. She didn't know his last name meant anything. She didn't know he could outrun most people's rent payments with a single swipe of a black card. And he decided, almost instinctively, to keep it that way. What happens when a man worth millions decides to hide his world from someone who looks directly into his soul? That's the story you're about to hear. A love story written in contrasts between truth and appearances, wealth and simplicity, fear and desire. Because sometimes, fortune can build walls taller than skyscrapers, and only love has the courage to climb them. It began on a quiet afternoon in a cafe that almost nobody would have expected him to be in. He could have been in a high-rise boardroom, negotiating numbers that had more zeros than most people could comprehend. He could have been miles away, on a yacht curving along the coast of Monaco surrounded by the glitter of champagne bottles and laughter too loud to be real. Instead, he chose the small corner cafe, a place that served cappuccinos with imperfect foam and croissants that crumbled in your hands faster than you could eat them. He liked coming here because no one cared. The owner called him sir, but never by name. The barista never asked why his shoes cost more than her car. It was his sanctuary, a place to feel ordinary. That afternoon she spilled her coffee. Not on herself, thankfully, but on the small wooden table near the window where the sun painted golden streaks across the room. Everyone else barely noticed, but he did. She laughed at her own clumsiness, wiped it with a handful of napkins, and instead of awkwardly apologizing to the people nearby, she looked around and grinned. That grin, it was like she was in on some secret joke about life, like accidents weren't accidents at all, but little reminders to slow down, to laugh, to remember that nothing had to be perfect to be worth enjoying. He found himself smiling too, though it had been a long time since he smiled without calculation. She ordered her drink, something simple, a latte with 1 spoon of brown sugar, and sat near the opposite corner. A book peeked out of her bag, dog-eared and bent from actual use. He wanted to know what she was reading, why she smiled to herself when her eyes danced across the page. 4 reasons he couldn't explain. He felt more curious about her in that moment than he had about any corporate deal or luxury acquisition waiting for him outside those doors. The truth is, he had everything. Everything people dream about: cars, penthouses, international recognition, a bank account that made most problems evaporate. But deep down, he carried the quiet knowledge that everything wasn't quite the same as enough. And here she was, a stranger with a coffee stain and a second-hand bag, radiating the kind of joy nobody could buy. Now here's where the contrast begins, the crucial piece. He chose not to introduce himself the usual way. Not with a business card, not with a carefully measured line designed to leave an impression, and certainly not with any clues about his wealth. He just walked over, smiled, and asked her if the book was as good as it looked. That was it, his first play in a game where appearances meant nothing. He was stepping into territory wealth had never prepared him for, because it required vulnerability, not assets. And for the first time in years he felt the thrill of not knowing where the story would go. They talked. At first about the book, then about her childhood memories, then about why the foam on her latte never came out the way she liked. He listened, truly listened, instead of waiting for his turn to speak, because every word she shared painted a picture he didn't want to stop looking at. She told stories about growing up, about her dreams of traveling, about her frustration with a job that never challenged her. She admitted, almost shyly, that she wanted to do something bigger with her life but didn't know how. And he found himself aching to tell her that she could. He could show her, he could open doors she didn't even know existed. But no, that was the one secret he refused to let slip just yet. Because how could he ever know if her laughter, her trust, her gaze at him across the cafe table, were real if she knew the weight of the empire behind his name? This was his chance, perhaps his only chance, to be loved for who he was, not what he had. But secrets carried their own shadows. And while he dreamt of moments like these stretching into forever, the ticking clock of truth whispered louder with every passing day. How long could he keep the world outside from colliding with the fragile reality he was building inside this warm corner of connection? This was only the beginning of their story. A story where every glance, every word, and every choice pulled the thread tighter around the question that mattered more than money, more than possessions, more than reputation. Could someone love him before they knew the magnitude of his wealth? Or would that very truth unravel everything? And here's the part that makes this story different from all the cliches you've heard. Because love tangled with fortune isn't simple. For him, hiding his reality wasn't just a test for her. It was a test for himself. Could he live stripped of the one thing the world believed defined him? Could he allow himself to be vulnerable when for so long, money was his armor, his shield, his convenient excuse to never truly reveal his heart? The answer to that unfolded in the days that followed, in the little details that would eventually become memories they'd both return to long after. But the stakes had already been set. One simple truth, one hidden fortune, one girl who never asked what he earned but only listened to how he felt. And that, right there, was both his greatest hope and his greatest danger. The next time they met wasn't planned, or at least she thought it wasn't. He had so many meetings to attend that carving an hour out of his week was like bending time itself, but he found himself slipping back into that cafe more often than he'd originally intended. Some part of him, a part he usually suppressed under calendars, contracts, and obligations, started rearranging his days to make space for her presence. He told himself it was coincidence, that he was just craving the same imperfect cappuccino or needed an hour of quiet. But coincidence became routine, and routine became something he actually looked forward to. And she was always there. Not every single day, but frequently enough that it felt like they'd woven an unspoken agreement into their lives. They'd greet each other as if no time had passed, as though each meeting was already expected. She'd be reading a book, sometimes making notes in a worn journal, while sipping her latte with brown sugar. He'd pretend to be immersed in his own laptop screen, but in truth, most of his attention lingered on her. The conversations grew longer, less about small details like books and foam and more about who they were. She shared tiny fragments about her past like puzzle pieces only given to someone patient enough to fit them together. A father who worked long hours but taught her how to dream, a mother who believed in resilience, memories of siblings who fought yet loved with equal passion. She talked about heartbreaks, about friends who betrayed her, about nights when she thought she was destined for something bigger but didn't know if she'd ever find it. There was a rose-colored honesty in her words, imperfect and vulnerable, and he knew that was what made them beautiful. In return, he revealed parts of himself he had long buried. Not the public version, the powerful millionaire, cut out the world recognized. He didn't mention luxury cars or penthouses. Instead, he talked about simple things: loneliness at the top, the hollowness of chasing numbers for the sake of chasing, the strange way people looked at him as though he existed in some category above them, isolated and untouchable. She listened, not because she suspected what his life actually was, but because she cared. And for the first time in years, he felt like someone cared about him more than about what he was worth. Days turned to weeks and weeks into months, and still she had no idea who he truly was. He wanted to tell her badly at times. He wanted to confess that the watch he wore wasn't just stylish, it was custom-made and worth more than her annual salary. He wanted to admit that while she talked about traveling as if it were a fragile dream she might one day catch, he could charter a plane that afternoon if she simply said yes. But he stopped himself. The longer the lie extended, the heavier it grew. But so did his certainty that she was different, that her laughter wasn't for sale, that her curiosity wasn't calculated, that her affection was freely given. That is precisely what terrified him. Because while he believed in her sincerity, the exposure of the truth loomed like a shadow. At some point she would know. At some point, the layers of his identity couldn't remain peeled away forever. How would she react then? Would the glow in her eyes dim, replaced by suspicion? Would her every word feel tainted, as though rewritten by the knowledge of what he had? It's in this conflict where our story tightens. Love thrives on honesty, but honesty can shatter when it's delayed. The more he delayed, the more fragile this bond became. And so each day carried a strange duality: joy in the present, dread for the inevitable. They began to have routines beyond the cafe. A walk through the park after their drinks. Shared stories beneath twilight, where streetlights flickered but their conversation never dimmed. He carried himself simply with her, wore plain jackets, left his watch at home, drove a rental car instead of one from his collection. She adored him, not knowing that this stripped-down version was a deliberate disguise. There was an evening when they sat on a bench watching street performers play a song on a violin. She leaned into him, resting her head lightly against his shoulder, and for a moment everything in his world, that vast empire he carried on his back, disappeared. He wasn't a tycoon, wasn't someone strategically hiding a colossal fortune. He was just a man with a girl beside him, breathing the same city air, feeling the same raw pulse of life. That moment reminded him of what he had always craved: simplicity with truth. And yet he was still lying. Contrast became sharper with each passing day. In his professional life, he was surrounded by people who chased him for deals, opportunities, favors, and wealth. Their eyes sparkled with hunger when they looked at him. But when he returned to her, there was none of that. She asked how his day was, not what dividends he pulled in. She wanted to know what made him laugh, what made him sleepless, what made him human. But a dangerous thought crept into his mind: was he unfair to her? Because while she offered openness, he held back a truth so immense it could reset the foundation of everything she thought they had. Each time she looked at him with her unfiltered trust, he felt both grateful and guilty. The turning point came one day when she confessed something quietly. They were sitting in the cafe again, the late afternoon sunlight slanting through the window. She seemed nervous, tracing her finger along the rim of her cup. Then she finally said, "You know, sometimes I wonder if I'll ever be good enough for someone who really matters. Someone extraordinary. I feel so ordinary." His heart clenched. If only she knew. If only she could see what he saw when he looked at her: her light, her strength, her fearless honesty. If only she knew that her ordinary was the one thing extraordinary in his life. But he couldn't yet tell her. Not like this. Instead, he smiled gently and told her she was already more than enough. He meant it, every word. But part of him feared that one day, when she learned the full truth, she might think she was too little for a man with too much. Secrets, though, have a way of cracking wide open when you least expect. And as much as he wanted to control this narrative, the universe had a different plan in store. Because the deeper you love, the harder it is to hold back truth. And in love, truth always finds its way to the surface. The autumn air arrived quietly, slipping into the city like a guest at a dinner party who didn't want to disturb anyone at the door. Leaves spun into burnt gold and deep crimson, blanketing the sidewalks where they now walked together almost daily. For her, these walks were small moments of escape, breaks from her underpaid 9-to-5, a chance to share stories with a man who seemed to understand her in a way no one else ever had. For him, they were lifelines, threads of normalcy in the storm of his empire. But with every passing day, the lie pressed against his chest like an iron weight. It wasn't just the money. It wasn't just the penthouses, the fleet of cars, or the private network of staff orbiting his life. It was what the money meant. He wasn't who she thought he was. And though he loved the way she looked at him like any other man, he knew that the day would come when she realized he was anything but ordinary. One crisp evening, as street lamps began to flicker awake, she turned to him suddenly. "You're different," she said softly. "Not weird, not strange, different." It wasn't an accusation, more of a realization, one spoken with curiosity veined with hesitation. He froze for half a second, searching her face for any glimpse of suspicion. "Different how?" he asked carefully. She tilted her head. "I don't know. The way you listen. Like you're not distracted, like nothing else matters except this moment. People don't usually listen like that." Relief washed over him, but it came twined with dread. Because she was noticing. She wasn't catching his wealth or his status. She was catching the fracture in his ordinary mask. Sometimes, it's not the grandeur of a lie that betrays you, but the subtle cracks in the way truth strains to stay hidden. And yet, her observation pulled him deeper into her orbit. She appreciated something about him that no one else truly valued. Not the power, not the wealth, just the way he focused, the way he paid attention. That small confession meant more to him than the endless praises heaped on his boardroom victories or the shallow compliments at glittering social events. For her, he wasn't a headline or an empire. He was simply a man present in the moment. Still, the balancing act became harder outside their little bubble. Her world and his world were never meant to collide, and yet the threads were slowly getting tangled. There were moments when he nearly slipped, when his phone rang with urgent calls from assistants reminding him of flights, conferences, numbers, deadlines. He always silenced them quickly, making excuses. But she noticed his phone was always vibrating, and she smiled curiously. "You must be very busy," she remarked once. "Only when I let myself be," he said with a half-smile. There were other times too. Once she casually asked why he never mentioned his job in detail. Everyone else she knew complained endlessly about their work, but he spoke about it only vaguely as if it didn't define him. She assumed he must be modest, maybe in a field he wasn't proud of, maybe even unemployed but too proud to admit it. He laughed softly, letting the misunderstanding carry him forward. Because, in truth, modesty wasn't what silenced him, fear was. And fear only grows when love deepens. By November, their connection had passed the stage of casual afternoons. They had begun building traditions. Thursday nights meant long walks by the river, where her scarf trailed in the wind and he tucked his hands into his coat pockets, letting himself enjoy the silence that was never empty with her beside him. Sunday mornings meant small breakfasts at the cafe, trading bites of toast, laughing at how she always ordered too much jam. And late nights, those sacred hours past midnight, meant phone calls where she whispered her dreams into the dark, trusting him with words she admitted she'd never voiced aloud to anyone else. She told him she wanted to write, not just in journals and notebooks stuffed into her bag, but stories that could reach the world. She wanted to build something that lasted, something she could be proud of, even if it meant scraping, failing, and starting again. He admired her dreams, admired the hunger in them, even as he held onto his own private secret. He could bankroll her vision 10 times over without blinking. But he said nothing. Because if he did, he feared he wouldn't be helping her. He'd be corrupting the purity of her fight, the sincerity of her dreams. One night, though, cracks nearly gave him away. They were walking past a sleek showroom where a new luxury car gleamed under bright lights. People stopped to gawk, whispering about its impossible price tag. He laughed quietly, not out of cruelty, but because he knew he had that very car idling beneath his apartment. She caught the laugh, misinterpreting it as disbelief rather than familiarity. "Imagine affording that," she said. "You'd feel like a king." He looked at her for a long second, then nodded. "Maybe. But sometimes kings feel lonelier than beggars." The words slipped out before he could catch them, a shard of truth hidden in metaphor. She frowned at first, as if trying to untangle his meaning, then reached for his hand. He squeezed hers gently, caught in a storm of guilt and gratitude. The universe, however, never tolerates long-drawn lies. Just when he thought he could keep balancing the two halves of his life, the mask and the truth, the scales began tipping. One evening, after a long day, she suggested coming over to his place. "We've spent so much time in cafes and parks," she said. "I'd like to see your world, where you go home to at night." His heart slammed against his ribs like a prisoner rattling bars. Images flashed through his mind. What would she think if she stepped into the vast penthouse at the top of a skyscraper, with its rooftop garden and infinity pool glittering against the skyline? What light could possibly explain butlers, designer furniture, artwork worth more than small towns? "That's complicated," he stammered, grasping for excuses. "It's being renovated. Messy. Not exactly the best place right now." She blinked but didn't push. Her trust was that strong. That almost made it worse, because he had now built a fortress of love on foundations soaked with deception. Later that night, lying awake alone in his sprawling bedroom, he stared at the ceiling and asked himself the question he had been dodging for months. How much longer could he keep this going? Would he wait until she accidentally discovered his truth? Or would he finally summon the courage to tell her himself? Because love built on secrets is like sailing with fire hidden in the hull. It burns silently until the day it swallows everything. The clock was ticking. Winter sharpened the nights, frosting the city in pale glitter and clouds of quiet breath. Shops dressed themselves in string lights, windows filled with coats and shiny packages. People moved faster on the streets, bundled in scarves and hurrying toward warmth. For them, though, the cold became another kind of intimacy. They lingered on park benches until their fingertips stung, walked longer routes just to extend their time together, laughing at their own stubbornness against the bitter air. But the closer December crawled, the thinner his excuses became. She still didn't pry. She still didn't ask why his shoes looked suspiciously flawless or why he never panicked about money the way most of her friends constantly did. She accepted his vague stories about consulting work or projects. But deep down he knew she'd begun to collect tiny puzzles, fragments she might not even realize she was assembling. A slip in tone here. A casual contradiction there. She didn't notice them yet, but she would. And fate has a cruel way of accelerating truths we try to hide. They planned a day trip to a nearby town, a small escape away from the humming chaos of the city. He offered to drive, carefully choosing one of his rented cars, an aging sedan with squeaky windshield wipers, rather than something from his own collection. As she climbed in, humming to herself, she didn't notice how awkwardly his tall frame fit into its worn seats. She simply looked out the window with wide-eyed excitement, like a child about to embark on an adventure. He envied that, her ability to find joy in simplicity. The day was perfect. They wandered markets lined with fresh bread and spices that clung to the air, stopped into art shops where brushes and canvases crowded the walls. He let her tug him into bookstores that smelled of old pages and possibility. He rarely bought anything, though he kept a mental tally of all the things she admired, secretly noting them down. If he couldn't reveal his wealth, he could at least file away future chances to surprise her. It was during lunch at a modest cafe that the moment arrived. She was recounting a story from her childhood when two sharply dressed men entered. They wore fitted suits, polished shoes, and they scanned the room with a particular kind of attention, professional, alert. And then one of them froze, staring straight at him. Recognition. It was subtle, but he caught it instantly. The flick of light in the man's eyes, the straightening posture, the whispered words into the other's ear. Panic tightened his chest. These were business associates. He remembered them clearly from a recent boardroom deal overseas. Men who knew him by name, by reputation, by the size of his empire. Men who could shatter everything in an instant with a careless greeting. And they began to walk over. His pulse thundered in his ears. He felt her shift beside him, blissfully unaware of the approaching storm. He leaned forward, lowering his voice urgently. "Excuse me for a moment. Need to make a quick call," he muttered, rising so fast his chair scraped the floor. By some stroke of fortune, he intercepted the men near the counter, pretending to check his phone. He leaned close, jaw tense, whispering sharply. "Not here. Not now. Someone else today. Please." They exchanged confused glances, then curious smirks. "We'll keep your secret," one said in a low voice, nodding with amusement. "Must be nice to take a vacation from yourself." And with that they left him alone. When he returned, she smiled warmly, unaware of the razor edge he had just balanced on. "Everything okay?" she asked, drawing patterns in the condensation on her glass. "Yeah," he murmured, forcing calm into his voice. "Just work. They can't leave me alone even for a day." He laughed to disguise the tremor underneath, and she laughed with him, accepting once again. But the walls around his secret had thinned. Danger seeped through the cracks. That evening, when he dropped her off at her apartment, she looked at him differently, still soft, still affectionate, but with a weight behind her gaze. "You know," she said quietly, "sometimes I feel like you're running from something. Like there are whole pages in your book you've torn out before I get a chance to read them." For a second he nearly confessed. The words gathered at the tip of his tongue. "I'm not who you think I am. I have more money than entire neighborhoods. I'm terrified you won't look at me the same once you know." But fear won again. He swallowed the confession, leaned forward, and kissed her instead. And for that night, the kiss was enough to silence the truth. But silence doesn't erase, it only postpones. The turning of the year brought gatherings, celebrations, and pressures he could no longer dodge. Invitations flooded his inbox. Galas, business events, charity functions. Normally, he navigated these with ease, performing the role of the untouchable magnate while cameras flashed and society gossiped. But now, every invitation was a threat. Because one day someone would connect the dots. Someone she knew might flip open a magazine and see his face beneath a headline of millions and mergers. One accidental revelation could undo the fragile reality he had built with her. The truth was circling, closing in. And for the first time he realized he might not get a choice in when or how it would surface. One snowy night, as they walked hand in hand down a quiet street lit by silver lamps, she asked him softly, "Where do you see us a year from now?" Her breath fogged the air, her eyes shimmering with hope. He paused, struggling between two conflicting realities. The one where he told her everything, risking the possibility of losing her, and the one where he kept lying, building their future on sand. "I see us together," he said finally, choosing safety again. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. She smiled at his answer, leaning against him contentedly. But deep inside, his guilt grew claws. For every step forward in their love, his silence dragged behind them like chains. And chains always leave scars. January storms painted the city in shades of steel. Snow clung to sidewalks in stubborn clusters, and the wind sliced through alleys with a bite that made even the most talkative crowds fall silent. Their walks grew shorter now, traded for evenings in bookstores, cafes, and the occasional library corner where whispers were their only language. He liked those places. They insulated them both, let the outside world fade behind low walls and unreadable glances. But the outside world never stays outside for long. She began asking more questions. Not the direct ones yet, not the kind that boxed him into corners, but small breadcrumbs. "How come you never talk about coworkers? Everyone has at least one friend from work they complain about." Or, "Your schedule is strange. Sometimes you're free all day, sometimes you vanish for days. What do you do that lets life bend like that?" He smiled, evaded, brushed them away with half-humored phrases. "I'm freelance. You know how that is, chaotic, unpredictable, sometimes everything at once, sometimes nothing." That seemed to satisfy her in the moment. But unconsciously she collected threads. Sooner or later, threads braid into ropes strong enough to pull the truth above water. The break came later that month. He had promised dinner. Not the kind of dinner he usually attended, ballrooms under chandeliers, endless rows of glasses clinking, but the kind she loved most, a small tucked-away restaurant that smelled of garlic butter and baked bread. She waited outside, bundled in her coat, stomping warmth into her boots. Time passed. An hour. Then another. She texted him twice, no reply. By the time he finally arrived, near closing time, she didn't look angry, she looked hurt. He slid into the chair opposite her, apology in his eyes. "I'm sorry. I just couldn't get away." Her fork sat untouched beside her. "From what? What's so important that you can't even send a message?" He hesitated. He could tell her the truth, that at that very hour he had been locked in negotiations about $1 billion acquisition, surrounded by a team of advisors and investors, far from cell phones and distractions. But how could he explain that when her world never brushed against numbers so impossible? "I was stuck in a long meeting," he whispered vaguely. The words felt hollow even as they left his lips. She studied him, searching his eyes. "You're hiding something from me. I don't know what, but I can feel it." Guilt twisted his chest, squeezing until it nearly broke through his composure. He reached across the table, taking her hand gently. "I'll tell you everything. I promise. Just, not yet." Her lips curved into a sad smile. "Do you know what that sounds like? Trust me, but only halfway." His heart shattered at the truth in her words. He wanted to pour it all out right then, dismantle the wall brick by brick until she finally stood in the real cathedral of his world. But his fear still chained him. Fear of the shift in her eyes once she knew. Fear of hearing words like, "You should have told me sooner," laced with betrayal. So he held her hand tighter, begging silently for more time. February carved itself on the calendar and brought with it Valentine's Day, an occasion he would usually glide through with ease, armed with diamonds, exotic restaurants, or weekend escapes to Paris, Rome, or Dubai. But with her all those things were impossible. Too revealing. Too excessive. So he bought her tulips, their petals white and pure, her favorite. He wrote her a card with his own hand, not dictating the words to an assistant as he so often had in the past. She cried softly when she read it, hugging him with a sincerity that stripped away for a moment the guilt eating at him. That night, she whispered against his chest, "I think I'm falling in love with you." His breath caught. He said it back, of course he did, but as the words left his lips, love and fear tangled into one knot. Because now it wasn't just about affection. Now it was about trust. To let her fall in love without knowing his truth felt like theft. And yet, the possibility of losing her made the thought of honesty unbearable. March came. Snow melted into dark puddles on the roads, and the city began stretching, yawning into spring. With it came invitations. He ignored them at first, silenced his phone, tried to live in the cocoon he had built with her. But then came one he could not refuse, a gala in his honor. His name would be printed in bold across banners, shouted by speakers, photographed by magazines. For weeks he stalled, telling his assistants to send polite declinations. But one evening as they sat together he slipped. She noticed the email flash across his laptop screen. His name. His full name. Printed alongside words like, honoring, and icon of the year. She blinked. Wait, that's you? His blood ran cold. He slammed the laptop shut, too fast, too defensive, sealing the truth between its steel casing. She tilted her head, suspicion forming in her widening eyes. What was that about? Nothing important, he muttered, already hearing the thinness of his excuse. Doesn't look like nothing. That looked like. She paused, her mind racing. Then softly, who are you really? The question hung in the air like a guillotine. He couldn't find words. He wanted to say everything all at once. About the money, the empire, the loneliness. But his throat locked. Instead, she shook her head, rising from her chair. I can't do this if you won't let me know you. And just like that she walked away. He sat in silence after the door closed, his world, built from steel towers and golden gilding, feeling emptier than it ever had before. The truth, the very thing he had feared, had cost him what he cherished most. Not because she discovered it, but because he couldn't face giving it. But love is resilient, and stories don't end at first fracture. The silence after she walked out was heavier than anything money had ever bought him. Deals collapsed before him in the past, investors stormed out of rooms, competitors tried to crush his empire, but none of that compared to the echo of a single closed door. He sat there for hours, staring at the shadows slicing across his apartment walls, shadows that felt more honest than he had been. For days he kept himself from reaching out, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know what to say. How does a man whose entire name is inked across financial journals explain why he pretended to be just another face in a coffee shop? How could he make her understand that the power he carried never felt like a crown, but a curse? He tried to bury himself in work, convincing himself that numbers and contracts could numb the ache. But even in meetings, while board members rambled about projections, his thoughts drifted back to her laugh, the way she scrunched her nose when confused, the way she looked at him like he was simply human, not some empire sealed inside a suit. Numbers blurred. Words blurred. For the first time he realized how useless his millions felt without her to anchor them. She meanwhile was silent. No texts, no calls, no little messages filled with her usual humor. For weeks, his phone remained an empty screen when he wanted it most to light up with her name. But absence has a way of sharpening feelings. Sometimes when something is pulled from you, only then do you grasp the size of the void it filled. He replayed their memories like a man haunting his own past. That clumsy first smile at the coffee spill. Her touch at the riverside bench. The tulips she cradled against her chest as though they were rare jewels. And beneath every memory was the same truth. She had given him her heart with honesty, and he had cloaked his in secrecy. The imbalance had finally tipped, not because of the money itself, but because of the gulf it carved between them. Weeks stretched, and by April he couldn't bear the weight any longer. He sent her a message, simple, direct. I owe you everything I never said. Please just give me one chance to explain. For 2 days there was no response. His chest stayed tight, his nights sleepless. And then, finally, her reply appeared like a fragile flame in the darkness. One chance. But if you're not honest with me this time, it's over. Relief and fear collided in him all at once. This was it, the line drawn, the point of no return. One chance. A single evening to bear himself without disguise. They met, not at the cafe where everything began, but at a quiet bench in the park where spring flowers were daring themselves to bloom through the chill. She sat there before he arrived, staring at the fountain with folded arms. He approached slowly, his breath heavier than the weight of skyscrapers. Thank you for coming, he began softly. She didn't look at him. I almost didn't. part of me still thinks you'll just spin another half-truth. No, he said quickly, sitting beside her. His hands trembled slightly. Not this time. No more lies. I swear you'll hear everything tonight. Her eyes flicked toward him, cautious, skeptical. Then start. He inhaled, the kind of breath a man takes before diving underwater. My life is not what I told you. The truth is, I've been hiding the size of it because I didn't want it to taint us. I wasn't afraid of rejection in the usual way. I was afraid you'd see the money first and me second. And I couldn't bear that. Her brow furrowed. So you're saying what, exactly? That you're rich? People exaggerate all the time. He almost laughed at the understatement, but his expression stayed serious. Not just rich. I own companies. I manage billions. I'm the man on the covers you probably walked past in bookstores without noticing. I live at the top of that glass tower by the river, the one everyone calls unreachable. Her lips parted slightly, disbelief etched across her face. The wordless space that followed stretched like a knife's edge. Finally she whispered, so all this time while I thought I knew you, you were hiding that? Yes, he admitted, pain carving each word. Because I wanted you to see me. Not the headlines, not the balance sheet, not the cars or the suits. Just the man who asked you about your book on that first day. Her silence was worse than anger. It was the silence of someone questioning reality. He leaned forward, desperate now. Do you understand what I'm saying? Every gift I could have showered on you, I didn't. Every chance to impress you with power, I resisted. Because what you gave me was priceless. You treated me as if I mattered without all of that. That's what I was protecting. Her eyes softened, but suspicion still glimmered. Or maybe you were protecting yourself. Because honesty is riskier than luxury, isn't it? You didn't trust me to see the truth and stay. The words pierced him. She wasn't wrong. At the heart of it, his lie wasn't about money, it was about fear. He didn't trust that love could be stronger than wealth's shadow. Finally she stood. He rose with her, panic rising in his throat. Please, he said, his voice breaking. If you walk away now, I'll still love you. If you need space, I'll give it. But know this, every day without telling you has been agony. And if you can forgive me, I will spend the rest of my life proving that what we have is real, no matter how much the world tries to twist it. She stared at him, caught between distrust and desire, memory and betrayal. I need time, she whispered after a long pause. I need to think about whether love can survive this kind of secret. And then she turned again, walking away across the soft grass. But this time he didn't feel the same collapse he had weeks earlier. This time he felt a spark. Because now at last the truth was no longer hidden. Now there was no disguise between them, only the raw question of whether honesty could rebuild the bridge deception had nearly burned. And sometimes the first fracture is what teaches love how to hold stronger. The days that followed were the longest of his life. With the truth spilling out at last, the waiting felt unbearable. She hadn't blocked his number, but she also hadn't reached out either. It was limbo, an invisible purgatory between hope and loss. In a way it was poetic. His wealth could buy almost anything, yet here he was, completely powerless in the place that mattered most, her choice. He resisted the urge to overwhelm her with messages. He knew that if he filled her inbox with desperate apologies, it would only sound like the same control his fortune offered, a loudness, a drowning presence. Instead he left her space, though every day stretched like years. He sent only one message a week: I'm still here. No masks. No lies. Just me waiting if you're ready. Meanwhile, she tried to make sense of the storm he had unleashed. Her closest friends would have told her to run, of that she was certain. Relationships built on secrets don't usually heal. And yet, every time she closed her eyes, she saw him not as a billionaire, but as the man who asked about her book. The man who walked through snow beside her, who bought tulips instead of diamonds because he noticed small details, who listened to her midnight whispers as if they mattered more than gold. The man was real, even if the disguise had been too. But could she trust him again? That unresolved question lingered until one evening, when her footsteps carried her back to the cafe where it all began. She hadn't planned to go there, yet her body moved on instinct. It was quieter than usual, the chatter low, the traffic outside faint. And there he was, alone at their usual corner table, staring at a closed notebook instead of a laptop or phone. He wasn't dressed in the polished armor of wealth, just a simple sweater, his hair unstyled, his face unreadable until he saw her. He stood quickly, eyes wide, words caught in his throat. She raised a hand to still him. "Don't say anything yet. Just sit." They sat, the silence tense but alive. She wrestled with her pulse, the words she'd rehearsed in her head. Finally she met his gaze. "Do you realize how much it hurt? To think I knew you, then to find out you were still a stranger?" "Yes," he said softly. "Every day since that night, I've realized it 1,000 times over. And yet you expect me to believe everything else was real? Because right now, part of me wonders if every laugh, every story, every late-night call was just part of some performance to hide the rest of you." The accusation cut deep, but he didn't flinch away. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice trembling with sincerity. "Everything I said about me, my fears, my loneliness, the way I see the world, that was real. What I hid wasn't my heart. It was my history, my titles, my wealth. And I hid those only because I wanted one person, just one, to see me as a man and not as a monolith of money." She exhaled slowly, struggling with the paradox of his words. "You don't understand what it's like," he continued, his tone steadying. "People always see the name, the numbers, the headlines. But you, when you smiled at me across stained coffee cups, none of that existed. It was freedom. The first taste of being loved as nothing more than human. And I was selfish, yes, because I wanted to keep that freedom as long as I could." Her eyes softened despite herself because part of her understood deeply. Yet the wound wasn't healed. "So what now?" she whispered. "You've told me the truth. What am I supposed to do with it? Pretend all those lies didn't happen?" "No," he said firmly. "You don't have to pretend. You don't have to forgive me today or tomorrow or ever if you choose not to. But what I hope is that you'll remember why you fell for me before you ever knew any of this. That was us. That wasn't fake. That's what I want to fight for." Silence again. Not cold but contemplative. She could feel he wasn't selling her something. There was no charm, no polished script. Just a man who looked close to breaking if she turned him away. Finally she stood. His chest tightened instantly, but she offered a small, tentative smile. "I'm not promising anything yet. But I'll meet you again. One step at a time. If you want me to believe you, you'll have to show me. Not with money. With everything else." It was a thread, fragile and glimmering. But to him, it felt like rope strong enough to pull him out of despair. He nodded quickly, nearly stumbling over his relief. "Anything. However long it takes." Her nod was cautious yet real. And that night they walked out together, not as lovers restored, not yet, but as two people brave enough to keep trying. And in stories like theirs, sometimes trying is the powerful beginning of everything that follows. What neither of them realized, though, was that real tests still lay ahead. Because love that has survived one fracture must survive many more. And when the outside world finally intrudes with all the weight of his fortune and fame, they will face the truest challenge of all, proving that honesty and love can hold fast against the harshest light. Spring unfolded in full, blossoms softening the city's edges, but their relationship still felt like walking across glass, beautiful yet fragile, every step echoing with the risk of a crack. They began seeing each other more regularly again. Quiet dinners, hushed conversations, cautious laughter. She let him in just enough to test his sincerity, but always with a shield raised, always with eyes watching for cracks in his promises. He accepted it. If all she could give him at this stage was a cautious hand and hesitant smiles, he would take it. Because this time he wasn't hiding anymore. When she asked what he'd done that day, he told her outright. Meetings with executives, signing contracts, even interviews with journalists. At first, she would react as though she'd wandered into a strange foreign landscape, half intimidated, half curious. But the raw honesty became its own bridge. Each admission rebuilt a small piece of what secrecy had destroyed. Still, the problem remained. His world wasn't built for shadows. Wealth attracts attention, and attention multiplies when you least need it. One evening, as they left a quiet restaurant on a side street, flashbulbs erupted. Photographers spilled onto the sidewalk, voices shouting his name, demanding smiles, demanding headlines. She froze, startled, gripping his arm tightly. Until that moment, she hadn't seen the circus that trailed him like a constant storm cloud. "Who's she?" someone barked, their lens pointed directly at her. Another voice echoed, "The mystery woman." Another shouted cruder, uglier comments. He quickly wrapped an arm around her, shielding her as best he could while his driver rushed them into a waiting car. Inside, as the door shut and the noise dimmed, her face told a story without words. Eyes wide, breath shallow, hands trembling. I didn't know it was like that," she whispered. He reached for her hand gently. "I wanted to protect you from it. But this is part of my life. Cameras. Stories I can't control. If you step into my world, they'll try to step into yours too." Her voice cracked on the reply. "And if I don't?" He looked at her with raw honesty. "Then I'll step into yours. I'll walk where the lights can't find us. But I can't erase what the world already sees. All I can promise is that I'll fight to keep the noise from swallowing you." She stayed quiet the rest of the ride, staring out the tinted window, and he feared this might be the breaking point. But when they reached her apartment, she turned to him before leaving. "If this is what it takes, you'd better prove to me the chaos is worth it." That line lingered in his heart, half challenge, half test. Days passed and the media frenzy only swelled. Headlines speculated about the unknown woman. Pundits dissected grainy images of them together, inventing narratives. Online gossip ignited with cruel theories: gold digger, opportunist, scandal. She read some of it, and it cut. Not because she cared what strangers thought of her, but because of how quickly their love had been twisted into spectacle. "You see," she said one night, tears brimming, "this is exactly what I was afraid of. You and me might be real, but to the world, I'm just another story to chew on." He pulled her close, holding her fiercely. "Let them talk. They don't know us. They don't know the girl with the dog-eared pages in her book, or the woman who laughs at spilled coffee, or the dreamer who whispers her stories to me at midnight. Let them invent lies. I only care about your truth." "And what if I can't handle it?" she asked. "Then I'll still be here," he said quickly. "Even if you walk away. But I'd rather walk through the storm holding your hand than walk through empty silence with all the money in the world." His words steadied her, slightly. But she knew storms leave damage. The following week, an invitation tested them again. A charity gala, one of the grandest of the season, with his face front and center on the list of honorees. He wanted her there, wanted her by his side not as a secret but as truth. Yet when he asked, she shook her head immediately. "No. Not like this. Not yet." He understood but felt the sting anyway. "Do you not want them to know about us?" "That's not it," she said, holding his gaze. "I just don't want them to define us before I've even decided what we are." Her words burned. They weren't yet we, not in the way he longed. They were still fragile, still unsteady. And in truth, maybe she was right. Why invite 1,000 eyes into something still mending? So he went alone that night, standing beneath crystal chandeliers, chains of diamonds glimmering across gowns, clinking glasses of vintage champagne swaying in manicured hands. He smiled, he posed, he played his role. But every second, he imagined her face instead of the empty space beside him. Later, scrolling photos from the event plastered across media sites, she lingered on an image of him, tall, commanding, smile perfectly practiced. Then she closed the screen and whispered to herself, "Is that the same man who sat on the cold bench with me, laughing at violin music?" She needed to know if both versions could exist without canceling each other out. And so she called him the next morning. "I want to see where you live." The words hit him like lightning. He knew what she was asking. No disguises. No pretending. She wanted to step fully into the world he had hidden. "Are you sure?" he asked cautiously. "No," she admitted. "But I need to see it. To see you. All of you. Only then can I decide." For the first time in months, his chest lifted. The chance wasn't complete forgiveness, but it was bigger. It was trust and potential. And sometimes, potential is stronger than certainty, because it means there's still a choice left to be made. The night she finally agreed to see his home, the city was painted in silver. Lights from skyscrapers shimmered across the river, cars below drew streaks of red and white across the bridges, and somewhere high above it all, his penthouse glowed faintly like a crown floating in the sky. She stood at the base of the building, staring upward with a mixture of hesitation and disbelief. It wasn't just tall. It was monumental, a glass giant scraping the atmosphere, its polished surface reflecting the world around it. She glanced back at him, searching for reassurance. "This is you," she whispered. He nodded quietly. "This has always been me. I just never wanted it to be the reason you thought I mattered. Inside, marble stretched brilliantly under her boots as the silent lobby swallowed them whole. Security guards straightened with immediate recognition, greeting him respectfully while eyeing her with discreet curiosity. Elevators opened at his gesture, sleek and gleaming. As they rose upward, her reflection hovered beside his in the mirrored walls. She clasped her hands nervously, eyes darting to his. "This is overwhelming," she admitted. "I know," he said softly. "It overwhelms me too. Every day." The doors opened, revealing his world. The penthouse spread itself like a kingdom hidden in the clouds. High ceilings arched overhead, lined with glass walls that turned the skyline into a living mural. At one edge, an infinity pool shimmered even at night, its water blending with the horizon. Shelves stretched with art pieces she'd only ever seen in magazines. And in the corner, a grand piano stood quietly, polished and waiting. Her breath caught. "This is impossible." "It's real," he said. "I wish I could have trusted you with it from the beginning." She wandered through carefully, her fingers brushing over elegant furnishings, priceless paintings, textures and colors that felt more alien than familiar. She stopped in front of a framed photograph on a shelf. Him shaking hands with global leaders, a smile on his lips that felt practiced, not real. "You live two lives," she whispered. "The man on that wall and the man who brings me tulips." He stepped closer, his voice low. "They're the same man. I just didn't know if you could love both." Her eyes flicked to him, uncertain. "And now you show me both. What if I can't handle it?" "Then at least you'll know it all," he murmured. She walked to the glass wall, staring out over the city, hands tucked into her sleeves. For a long time she said nothing. He gave her space, resisting the urge to fill silence with explanations or apologies. Finally she turned. "It's not the wealth itself that scares me. It's how much of you it hides. How easily you could have kept me outside this forever. If I hadn't pushed, would you have ever told me?" The question pierced him. He forced himself to be honest. "I don't know. I wanted to keep our bubble untouched. But I see now that by protecting it, I was destroying it. And if honesty costs me you, then at least I will have lost you without lies." She studied him, long, searching, like she was looking not at the apartment, not at the city, but at the man finally standing bare before her. "Show me something here that's real to you, not just expensive," she said suddenly. Without hesitation, he led her to the piano. Sitting down, he touched the keys, letting them hum softly under his fingers. "This playing calms me. Reminds me of my mother. She taught me before any of this," he gestured around the penthouse, "ever existed." The melody filled the room, simple but aching with sincerity. She stood beside him, watching as his hands moved, feeling emotions pour out more authentic than any financial empire could express. And for perhaps the first time in this towering penthouse, she could see him, the man beneath the fortune, vulnerable, flawed, desperately hoping. When he finished, silence hung between them like a held breath. "You're different when you play," she whispered. "I'm only myself when I play," he confessed. Her hand touched his shoulder gently. "That's who I fell for. Not the skyscraper. Not the suits. You." Relief surged through him, yet he didn't mistake it for forgiveness. She wasn't saying she could live with all of this, not yet. She was only saying she still recognized him inside it. And that was everything. He met her gaze, his voice trembling slightly. "So, does this destroy us or does it give us a chance?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked back to the glass, gazing out at the glittering labyrinth below, wrestling with the weight of both worlds inside her chest. Finally she turned, her voice quiet but decisive. "It doesn't destroy us. Not as long as you remember the man at the cafe as much as the man in this tower." Those words, fragile yet profound, wrapped around him like oxygen. He felt his chest ease, the iron weight lifting just slightly. She wasn't choosing the penthouse. She wasn't choosing the empire. She was choosing the possibility of them, on the condition that he never again let lies shackle their love. For the first time, hope didn't feel like a gamble. It felt like faith, fragile but real. But faith, like glass, is easily shattered. And while her choice that night gave him a glimpse of a future, he also knew the world outside wasn't finished testing them. Public eyes, harsh words, disaster and temptation, all of it lurked like shadows at the edges of their love story. The question wasn't whether she had accepted his truth. The question was whether they both could protect their bond when the world tried to devour it. In the weeks that followed her first night in his penthouse, life shifted into something neither of them had fully prepared for. The truth was out between them now, but that didn't mean it was easy. If anything, honesty had made the stakes higher. Every choice felt heavier, every glance between them seemed to ask the same unspoken question: can we survive this? At first there was progress. She visited him more often, not nightly, but enough that the apartment started feeling less like a towering museum and more like something they could share. She learned which corner of the sofa he liked to read in, which cupboard hid the teas he drank late at night, and how he absently hummed while staring out at the skyline when he thought too hard. He, in turn, kept proving his vulnerability, showing her journals where he wrote unfinished thoughts, playing piano nearly every evening because she said she loved hearing him lose himself in the music, and speaking openly about the loneliness he had carried for years. But no love story walks forward without stumbling. The world outside grew louder than either of them wanted it to. Magazines ran spreads about his new mystery girlfriend, plastering blurred photo after photo across glossy pages. Online headlines dissected her past, invading her privacy with speculation so false it bordered on cruel. At work, whispers followed her uninvited, co-workers Googling her name, trying to match it against stories they read. One night, overwhelmed, she stormed into his apartment, tears brimming, shoving her phone into his hands. "Look at this. They don't even know me and already I'm some scandal. A fortune hunter. A distraction. This isn't who I am." He stared at the screen, disgust threading through him as he read strangers' words. Then he lifted his gaze, fierce and steady. "None of this defines you. None of it." Her voice cracked. "Maybe not to you, but to everyone else? To my family, my friends? They'll see this and believe them. And I don't know if I'm strong enough to live under this spotlight." He pulled her close, gripping her as if she might vanish. "Then let them talk. Let them scream. You don't owe anyone your truth except me, and I'll never let them steal what we have." Though his words comforted her, she also knew the battle wasn't only outside, it was inside too. Could she adapt to a life where privacy shattered daily, where a simple walk on the street might spiral into headlines tomorrow? Could she make peace with loving a man whose world wasn't quiet, wasn't simple, wasn't safe? Their test came unexpectedly. At a charity gala, this time she agreed to attend by his side. They stepped into the ballroom together, and the onslaught was immediate. Cameras turned, lights flared, questions fired. At first, she managed polite smiles, leaning into his touch whenever flashes blinded her. But then it came. A reporter shouted across the noise, "Is she with you for love or for your money?" The room seemed to hush just slightly, enough for the words to sting harder, to echo louder. Her face tightened with pain, as though the question had crystallized every fear she carried. He did not hesitate. He turned to the cameras, his voice commanding. "She's with me because she loved me before she knew a dollar of what I owned. She's with me because she saw me, not my fortune. Ask me again and I'll say it louder, she is the most real part of my life." A murmur rolled through the crowd, some surprised, some doubtful, but he didn't care. What mattered was the way she looked up at him in that moment. Eyes wide, defenses trembling, but heart flickering with belief. Later, when they returned to his penthouse, she stood silently at the glass wall, staring at the night as though replaying every second. Finally she whispered, "When you said that out loud, for the first time, I believed people might see me as you see me. Not a shadow, not a scandal. Just me." He stepped beside her, their reflections mingling against the skyline. "That's all I've ever wanted, for you to never doubt that I love you. The girl who spilled her coffee, the dreamer who fills journals with stories, the woman who gave me her laughter without asking for anything in return. That came before the truth and it will outlast it too." A tear slipped from her eye, but her lips curved into the smallest smile. She turned, resting her forehead against his chest. "Then show me. Every day. Because if I'm going to choose this, I need to know the man at the cafe still exists, even when the world tries to replace him with the man on magazine covers." He wrapped his arms around her tightly, as though promising with more than words. "He exists," he whispered. "And he always will." From that night onward something shifted. The world didn't stop intruding, but love became their anchor instead of their shield. She learned to laugh off the noise not because it hurt less, but because she had proof every day of where his loyalty lay. He learned to merge his two halves, the tycoon on the cover and the man who scribbled midnight melodies, until they weren't halves anymore but one whole she could trust. Months later they returned to the very cafe where it all started. The same corner table, the same aroma of imperfect cappuccinos, the same sunlight spilling like gold through the window. As they sat together, people still glanced at him, the powerful man everyone else recognized, but when she looked into his eyes she saw only the man who once asked, "Is that book as good as it looks?" And in that moment both of them knew this truth. Money could buy almost anything: castles, art, recognition, endless distraction. But love, trust, and the fragile honesty of two people who dared to meet each other without masks? That was priceless. And it was theirs. The millionaire and the girl who loved him before she knew his fortune. Proof that sometimes the greatest wealth isn't counted in numbers, but in moments two hearts are brave enough to share.